get into it. Let's have a look at the first map, Heading for New Shores. The most important new feature the game of Seafarers adds compared to the base game are ships. Ships cost wood and sheep, and therefore wood and sheep are more important compared to the base game. Ships are definitely important in the game of Seafarers because they are the only way to get to the islands. And getting to the islands is key because if you build a settlement on one of those islands, you gain 2 extra points. This is why settling on islands and heading for new shores is the #1 strategy. In terms of resources you want to pair them with, it's ore, wheat, sheep and wood. So basically everything besides brick is extremely valuable. Like I said before, building on the islands is the #1 strategy to do. However, pacing is key within the game of Seafarers, as well as making sure you can get to multiple islands. That's why I recommend on building on a 3 hex spot near the coast. You could also decide to build on a 2 hex spot, which is not a problem at all, but 3 hex spots are generally better because they give you more production, and with that more cards to do something over the course of the game. You want to make sure you pace yourself properly, because if you build on one of those islands early in the game, 2 points will be added to your total. And this will make it so that your opponents believe that you are in the leading position, and that's why they will block your spots and steal from you with the robber. That's why I think that proper pacing is really important, and that's also why I think a 3 hex spot is better than a 2 hex spot, because you can go a little bit slower toward the island. However, you want to make sure that you go on the islands, because if you don't build on the islands, there's no way you go to 14 points. In the game we see on screen, I really think that Green has an excellent setup. He started on the 8 for 10 with his first settlement spot, which gives him sheep, wheat and ore. And also because it's a 3 hex spot near the coast, it makes it so he has a great possibility to go to the middle island. By building on the 6-5-11 with his second spot, he also gains good wood production, and because he's likely to settle on the 3-for-1 port near the coast, he has a great flexibility as well, turning his sheep into the cards he needs. I had the second pick in this game and I placed the first one on the 8-5-10, giving me 3 of the 4 resources I need. I knew the 8-3 was likely to be available for me, so I would have at least a decent strategy. The 8-3 allows me to go both to the top and the middle island, which allows me 4 additional victory points, and I only need 10 more. The reason why I believe I won this game is because the 8 rolled quite a bit, because Green is a relatively new player to the game of Seafarers, and I did better in terms of trading and hand tracking. As you can see, I got 52% of the points on this table. However, the current screen also shows a big mistake I made during the game. Did you catch it? Okay, here it is. The game ends at 14 points, however I got to 15. So that basically means I spent resources into a point I didn't need at all, which in a closer game could have costed me the game. So you don't want to do any unuseful stuff, you want to pace yourself to 14 and don't want to do anything else. A good example of useless stuff would be Green's first road, as he plays it down to the 10-3-11. He doesn't need more production than he already has, and if he wants to get more production he should just city up his 8-4-10. If he wants to build a road, he should go to the coast first, because then he has more flexibility, because he can build boats and has a 3-for-1 port. Let's have a look at the second map, the 4 islands. You can win the 4 islands map by going to 13 points. Opposed to heading for new shores, where you could only start on the main island, you can start everywhere you want in the 4 islands at the start of the game. On top of that, every time you settle on a new island you haven't settled on before, you gain 2 extra victory points. So as you can see on this board, I settled on the 8-5-4 and the 6-3. So that means that I'm on the right island and the bottom island. But if I settle on the left island or the top island, I get 2 extra points. So the #1 strategy for this map is also to go to the other islands as fast as possible. A lot of fundamentals are the same with heading for new shores. You still want high production, you want 3 hex spots, and you want the resources ore, wheat, sheep and wood. You also still want to pace yourself properly. If you get too many points too quickly, your opponents will notice and they will stop you whatever way they can. You want to make sure you build on settlement spots that allow you to go to the other islands. For example, the 5-10-2 is a really good spot on this map. However, you can't really effectively go to any other spot. Another really important feature for all Seafarers maps is recognizing scarcity of resources. Scarcity means there is less of a specific resource on that certain map. For example, on this map there's not a lot of ore. That's also why I went with the 8-5-4 instead of the 6-9-10. They both offer the same amount of production, however the ore is more important than the brick on this board. These rare resources are very important because they can offer you a certain amount of trades. Because there's less ore on the board, people will more likely look for ore during the game, so I might be able to get 2 cards for 1 card if I offer an ore. brick holds a very interesting position within the game of Seafarers. Because a lot of people recognize that brick isn't very important. It actually becomes very important. If nobody settles on brick except that one player creates a monopoly on the brick. So every time another player wants to trade for brick, they have to pay a high price because there's only one player offering. It also makes it so that the brick port is very important, because then you can trade 2 bricks for 1 useful card. I still recommend to go with the ore wheat sheep wood strategy. However, if you gain a lot of brick and you have a brick port, you can be in a really good spot too. You just need a high amount of production. Because the strategy of going to the islands is widely recognized as strong, people will build a lot of ships during the game, which will make fighting for the longest road very difficult to do, because you need a ton of ships to win it. That's why I personally go for the largest army as much as possible, because more often than not I'm the only player going for the largest army. So that's 2 points right up for the grabs. Ultimately, this game was really close with red ending as the winner. I made a couple of mistakes of going to the top island a little too fast and not going to the left island at all. Let's move on to the third map, the Fog Islands. You can start on either of the main islands, and there are no settling on island bonuses within the Fog Islands. The game ends when someone reaches 12 points, and there's one new feature called fogs. These fogs remain unidentified until a ship touches them. And when a ship touches them, they reveal what resource is below it. You gain the resource you've discovered under the fog. You can settle on the islands that were covered below the fog, but you don't gain 2 extra victory points for settling on them. In terms of strategy, the Fog Islands is a little different than the 2 previous ones. There are still a lot of things the same. You still want to have a lot of production, you want free hex spots, you want the resources ore, wheat, wood and sheep, and scarcity of resources is still very important. Brick is still the most useless resource, maybe even more so in this game than in the other game modes. A big difference is that pacing is less important. You can settle on the islands whenever you want, because you don't gain those empty 2 victory points. There are 2 strategies that work the best. In my opinion, strategy number 1 is good old ore wheat sheep. You can basically play ore wheat sheep base game within the Seafarer scenario. You can stay on the main islands, because discovering fogs is not that efficient. You basically pay a wood and a sheep to gain 1 card back. And you don't know whether or not the spot below the fogs is better than the spot you have available on the main island. Ore wheat sheep only works if you have really strong ore wheat sheep. If one of them lags, it doesn't work as well. Another feature of playing the ore wheat sheep is that largest army is up for the grabs. Knights are extremely good within Seafarers, because you don't only have the opportunity to move the rubber, you also have the opportunity to move the pirate ship. The pirate ship can be placed on water tiles, and if they are placed near the ships of other players, you can steal from that player. An additional feature is that your opponent can't build new ships near the pirate ship, and also the current ships can't be moved at all. A fun trick to use in Seafarers is when you don't have any ships on the board and your opponents do, is to use the pirate ship instead of the rubber and put them on one of them. Because if they want to move it, they can't move it back to you, because you don't have any other ships they can move it to. This works extremely well against the second best strategy. That's also why I think the ore wheat sheep is better than the second best strategy on the Fog Islands. The second best strategy in my opinion is the double wood sheep strategy. This strategy focuses on getting a lot of wood and sheep in order to build a lot of ships and discover the fogs. This strategy is really effective in getting the longest route and discovering the fogs and getting good settlement spots. It's really important to have good production and good flexibility within your game plan, and also to think about who are you competing with to be able to get to the fogs. If multiple players are aiming towards the top side of the fogs, then it's a good idea for you to aim at the bottom side of the fogs, because then you're the only player competing for those fogs. Some things I've noticed when I use this strategy is that you want to move a boat every single turn if possible. You also don't need a port in the early stages of the game, because you're discovering the fogs, and that's when you gain unexpected resources regardless. Later in the game you do need the ports, however you don't necessarily need them at the start of the game. Another new feature in the game of Seafarers are gold mines, and gold mines work as follows. If you're settled on a gold mine and the number rolls, you can choose what resource you want to get from the bank. It can either be ore, wheat, sheep, brick or wood. So gold mines when they roll are extremely flexible. However, every player and their mom recognizes that gold mines are pretty strong. So that's why they get hammered with the rubber over and over again. In my opinion, gold mines are a trap. The Fog Islands have a pretty interesting metagame as it's not really clear what strategy is the best. However, these both strategies are pretty effective and I recommend you to use them. On this board you can see Black applying the double wood double sheep strategy and he discovers a lot of great places within the fogs. I tried to do the Orby sheep strategy in combination with a fog strategy, however I didn't expect Red to place on the 8-10 instead of the 8-4, which would give him the Orby sheep strategy as well. Now I didn't have enough ore to win the game and Black won instead. The fourth map we're looking at is Through the Desert. Through the Desert is a little bit the same as our first map, heading for new shores. You start on the main island and the game ends when someone goes to 14 points. The number one strategy is the same as heading for new shores and you want to be able to settle on as many islands as possible. You'll gain 2 victory points for every island you'll settle on. So I definitely recommend you to go there on this scenario as well. However, a difference between these two scenarios is the sand island. Between the main island and the sand island is not water but desert. Somehow this also counts as an island. I don't know why. But what I do know is that it creates the biggest strategic difference between these two scenarios. Because on this map, if you go to the sand island, brick becomes a little bit more valuable than in the other game modes. You still want to be able to settle on free hack spots that generate a high production value. It's ore, wheat, sheep and wood are still the most important resources unless you go to the sand island. Then brick becomes important as well. You want to be able to figure out how to go to the islands. Largest army is very good in this game mode as well. And you want to think about the proper pacing. You don't want to get those empty island points as soon as possible. You want to get them as late as possible as you can. Scarcity of resources is also very important on this map because you can get good trades with your opponents. You want to make a 14-point plan and I would recommend you to use the 6-6-2 method. 6 points on the main islands, which means 3 cities, either the largest army or longest road, by building a settlement on 2 different islands, giving you 2 points for the settlements and 4 points for the islands instead, which equals a total of 14 victory points, which wins you the game. My best tip for you is to play the game a lot and see it for yourself. The differences between these scenarios make Seafarers a very enjoyable way to play Catan. Next week I'll publish the number 1 strategy for the remaining scenarios on Catan Universe. And if you want to see a full game of mine, I've recently played the Seafarers finals of the King of Catan tournament, which is linked on the screen. Thank you for watching and I see you on the next one.